Okay, so we'd finished learning about the different types of practitioners dating back from Greek theatre to modern day and contemporary theatre, such as practitioners like Stanislavski and Berkhoff that we've been working on. We moved on to someone called Sarah Kane. Sarah Kane is quite an interesting practitioner. I feel like she sets aside quite differently from a lot of people that we've been looking at previously. In the fact that her theatre was extreme. She wrote quite a few plays, and we started looking at some of her ideas, our understanding of her, and I'm going to talk about my understanding of her and what I'd researched. And then we also started looking at one of her plays and sort of the ideas that she brings about. So when we first looked at Sarah Kane, we looked at her life works and her life in general. So from my research as well, we found out that she had quite a few problems with mental health. She suffered with severe depression, and she was in and out of hospitals quite a lot, and this eventually led to her suicide after she'd been writing some plays. I'm not sure what year, 1999, when she managed to actually kill herself. She tried to kill herself with a drugs overdose and then actually managed to. So obviously that shows that Sarah Kane did struggle a lot with mental health, a lot of health issues. And I think that is an important factor when it comes to looking at her works, because obviously that influenced a lot of her works in what she wanted to show. Obviously she wasn't going to be doing anything that was like a musical or anything that just made things seem too happy. She was going to do a more raw and intense type of play, and that's what she did. Her plays often involved subjects that weren't widely talked about. These were things that weren't shown on stage, things that were very controversial. A lot of people who wrote about Sarah Kane at the time called her theatre in-your-face theatre, so it was really extreme, and it left audiences with a real sense of shock when they went to go see the plays and after they'd finished seeing the plays. She originally wanted to become a poet, but she wasn't able to convey her feelings through poetry. I think because her feelings were so intense that she needed to provoke a reaction from an audience, so she chose a more wider platform to do that, and that was obviously theatre. In regards to her early works, what we'd learnt about in lesson was breaking taboos. So we were given this task to do, to break a taboo, obviously within reason. So making sure that we weren't doing anything that was illegal or hurting anybody. But we first brainstormed some taboos, obviously things that people would find uncomfortable to watch on stage, things that would be you would never really see on stage, that wasn't talked about. So we came up with some examples such as rape or torture, or someone defecating on stage or masturbating on stage. And we looked at some of these ideas and were given the task to break one of these taboos, but have a sort of message / meaning behind it. And I'll talk more about that later, what we decided to do as me, Hannah and Bella, and the meaning behind it and how I thought this linked to Sarah Kane's work. But before that, we looked at one of her first plays. I think this was actually her first play, called Blasted. Obviously we knew a little bit that her work was really shocking, that it broke taboos, that it was extreme, that everything was shown on stage. So if someone was being raped, it was on stage. It wasn't like a thing that they would talk about. It was shown physically on stage. I think that was something really new of the time. So in Blasted, it takes place in a hotel room. There's a young female character and a middle-aged male character. He is quite racist, he's sexist, he is homophobic, and it's sort of set in a modern-ish time obviously probably not our century, but a modern-ish sort of time. And when looking at this play, this picking up that the language was really rude, and on purpose it made you feel really uncomfortable. Not only when we were reading it, because obviously when we were visually watching it, sorry, the language itself was a real straight away major thing that would provoke the audience. And I think that's one thing that I learned about Kane, in the way that she straight away lets the audience know that this is not going to be some happy play. It's serious, and it's offensive, it's raw and real. She then sort of builds the taboo, breaking more and more as she goes along. I think they get bigger, I think they get worse, and maybe that's a major feature of Kane's work, in the fact that she wants to build the tension, the uncomfortableness of the audience, to a point where at the beginning you think, whoa, this is really offensive, hard to watch, hard to listen to when you're later on in the play and you're like, oh my god, this is really hard to watch. And obviously, as you would understand and believe, that this got really mixed reviews. Especially when Kane was still alive, a lot of people didn't like any of her works. They were seen as, too in your face, too grotesque, too rude. It wasn't something that you would go and enjoy at the theatre. I think she didn't really see it as that either. So it got a lot of mixed reviews. There are still mixed feelings about Kane's work today, but obviously there are some people who think that her work is quite credible, it's important. Personally, I think that her work is important to show off different depths of theatre. So like breaking certain taboos on stage, I feel could be effective in conveying like messages. So in certain ways that would have more of an impact on an audience. Say for example, if you were tackling like an issue like rape, but then also it to the point where people are too deterred from going to see it, or where it takes to the point where it's quite offensive to a lot of people watching it, I think it's not really acceptable, not too keen on. So Kane's work really followed. We only managed to look at the play Blasted that she worked on, and those were my thoughts on it. Obviously, the main characters have a lot of depth to them. There were a lot of status change, and power was passed a lot throughout the characters in what we had read, because the middle-aged man had a lot of the power, had a lot of the higher status, until the soldier came in, and the soldier raped the man. So obviously the power was passed to the soldier, and I think it was all about the main messages. It was to do with war and conflict, is what Chip told us, but I think the main messages was also that you are always the aggressor of something. So the soldier was the real enemy in the situation, but the male was the person who was not very nice to the woman, and the woman herself was quite a vulnerable character, but then she obviously did fight back against the male again. So I think it's all to do with this sort of cycle of power, and maybe that could link to the fact that war is all to do about getting like power and stuff. So moving on to what we did for our Easy Taboo. Our Easy Taboo, we thought about initially the fact that it has to be quite realistic to provoke some sort of uncomfortableness with our audience, especially because our audience know us. So it means that they're less likely to, they have sort of a bias towards watching us, in the fact that they feel more comfortable around watching each other and things like that. So we looked at what could be most realistic because obviously we have limited resources as well. So we focused on potentially putting one of us in danger without actually harming us. So we decided on the idea of drowning Hannah in a bucket, so putting her head in the bucket and for her to make screaming and shouting and the effects of drowning basically. We felt like this could be a really strong effect because obviously if you see someone being tortured, it's an uncomfortable situation to be in. And when we started thinking more about in depth about the meaning behind it, that's when we created our scenario. So initially it was just the idea of drowning, that's the taboo we were going to break, and we decided that in a situation and relating it to real life situations that happen as well in real life, we thought about Hannah being a Muslim woman. Religion is a real controversial thing as well, in the fact that the slightest thing you do is offensive, because those are some sacred things to other people, so we had to be really cautious about what we were doing, making sure that we were following what Cain's ideas were in a closed room, because we felt like the more offensive you are and racist, that relates to Cain, but obviously in our society was not acceptable. So we thought Hannah would be a Muslim. We dress her up as a Muslim with a headscarf, wearing black, and then we would have 2 American soldiers who are the ones that were torturing her. We thought about the scenario that she could have stolen a loaf of bread, and that the punishment was the drowning. Obviously these are really extreme ideas, and it's a really extreme punishment, but there are scenarios and situations in those countries, Islamic countries, where those things have taken place, and it's been obvious that those situations have taken place where people have just stolen because they needed to, and during situations like war as well, linking to Sarah Cain's first play, power has got to people's heads and they've done things that are just really awful. So obviously this led to thinking about costume for us as well, army uniforms in contrast to the Muslim headscarf. We thought about ripping the headscarf off Hannah's head. Again, a really offensive thing to do, but we were thinking in regards to Sarah Cain, that's one of the things she probably would have pushed, and it's almost, I feel, like breaking another taboo, especially in a multicultural society today. The idea that the 2 soldiers were finding pleasure in torturing a Muslim woman, so perhaps that could be another taboo as well because they were enjoying it. So when it came to our actual final piece, the dialogue that we used as well, we tried to focus on that and then the physicalness, because what I find and I think about Sarah Cain is that she uses explicit, really offensive language, and that she physically demonstrates the torture / taboo on stage, and she breaks it. So in our final piece, our piece that we did when we finally showed it, I think we managed to achieve this mostly. We dragged Hannah on stage, obviously we weren't allowed to film it, dragged Hannah on stage and talked to her, and I think we made it clear that she had stolen, so that was the message that we wanted to convey, the storyline, and the message was obviously the control and power and war and torture. We dunked her head in the bucket, and sort of using words that were really specific to Muslims, to Pakistani people, in terms of racism and skin colour. In the feedback that we got from Chip, he said that the words that we used, we weren't saying them as much, we should have been even more offensive and using more of the language. Obviously it was more difficult because we didn't want to be too offensive, take it too far. We both felt a bit uncomfortable using that language, but I think if you were in a Sarah Cain play, you would have to do that. And it's obviously the effects of her play that shock the audience and leave them with the messages that the play was trying to convey. We also let Hannah have the control and lifting her head up and down. We didn't take the headscarf off. We thought that was a bit extreme, but we could have experimented with that more. If next time we probably would experiment with that more, see what sort of effect it would get, and maybe get feedback from Chip as well. Towards the middle, we sort of lost what we were saying, really. We ran out of sort of dialogue. We didn't want to overdo it with the dialogue. We didn't really know what to say, so it was more focused on Hannah drowning, and I think it was quite intense. I think it achieved what we wanted it to achieve. A lot of people said it was shocking, and we definitely broken the taboo of torture. Obviously the main things were like experimenting with the language more, but I definitely learned that Sarah Kane's style was absolutely brutal, something that you wouldn't usually perform, but I think it worked well in contrast to people like Stanislavski and Berkoff, because they still want to convey a message, especially Berkoff, but the way in which Kane does it is way more explicit and extreme, and I think that might stick with an audience better.